The desert mountain range appears still from a distance, but nothing here is truly at rest. Sheer cliffs rise from the sand like fractured monuments, their surfaces scorched by an unforgiving sun. Heat settles into the rock and lingers long after daylight fades, turning the terrain itself into a reservoir of stored fire. Wind moves cautiously through narrow passes, carrying dust instead of relief. There is no visible water, no flowing streams. No sign that this land offers mercy to large living bodies. From above, the landscape seems almost empty. Vegetation clings to cracks in the stone, sparse and brittle, drawing life from soils too thin to hold moisture for long. Shadows retreat quickly as the sun climbs higher, leaving few places to hide. In this environment, exposure is constant. Survival depends not on speed alone, but on restraint, timing, and an intimate understanding of terrain. The danger here does not announce itself with movement, it waits. Open slopes offer no cover. Narrow ledges become corridors of risk. Any descent toward the valley floor brings visibility, and visibility invites attention. Predators do not need to chase in such places, they only need patience. Water, when it appears, is never generous. It collects briefly after rare rains, pooling in shallow depressions before evaporating under the desert sky. These locations are predictable, and predictability is costly. Every approach carries consequence. Every pause stretches time into vulnerability. Yet, despite these conditions, signs of life persist. Hoof marks cut across exposed rock faces, paths worn into near-vertical walls suggest repeated movement where movement should not be possible. Something large passes through this landscape without surrendering to it, not by conquering the desert, but by navigating its limits. The rhythm of this place is not set by abundance, but by absence. Absence of shade, absence of water, absence of error. Survival here demands precision measured in hours and meters, not strength alone. Those that endure do so by aligning themselves with the land's harsh timing rather than resisting it. As the sun reaches its highest point, the mountains seem to harden further, sealing themselves against intrusion. What moves here must do so quietly, deliberately, and rarely without purpose. In this desert of stone, life is not sustained by constant access to resources, but by knowing when not to seek them. This is a landscape where drinking can be more dangerous than thirst, and where endurance depends on learning how to survive with almost nothing at all. Among these desert mountains lives a large herbivore whose presence seems to contradict the environment itself. The Nubian ibex is built for places where footing is uncertain and mistakes are final. Its body is compact but powerful, balanced on narrow legs that end in hooves adapted not for soil, but for rock. Each step is calculated, gripping tiny ledges and angled surfaces that appear unusable to most other animals. This species occupies a narrow ecological niche. It does not roam open plains or depend on broad grazing grounds. Instead, it lives along cliffs and steep slopes, where vegetation grows in isolation and predators struggle to follow. These vertical refuges are not chosen for comfort, but for survival. Height reduces competition. Inaccessibility limits threat. The ibex feeds on sparse desert plants, leaves, shoots, and hardy shrubs capable of storing minimal moisture. These plants grow slowly and unpredictably, scattered across elevations where soil is thin and rainfall rare. As a result, feeding routes are not random. Movement follows patterns shaped by terrain and season, repeated generation after generation. Despite its size, the Nubian ibex does not rely on frequent access to water. In this landscape, water is both scarce and exposed. Descending toward it requires leaving the safety of rock walls and entering open ground where visibility increases and escape routes disappear. For a large animal, such exposure carries significant risk. Instead, the species survives by limiting how often it drinks. Moisture obtained from vegetation, combined with physiological efficiency and careful timing, allows the ibex to endure long intervals without approaching open water sources. This strategy does not eliminate thirst, but it delays danger. Within the ecosystem, the Nubian ibex functions as a specialist. It converts limited desert plant life into biomass that supports higher trophic levels. Predators depend on it, yet cannot easily access it. This balance shapes movement patterns not only for the ibex, but for the species that watch and wait below. Here, survival is not determined by dominance or aggression. It is governed by discipline, by knowing where to move, when to stop, and when not to descend. In an environment defined by scarcity, the Nubian ibex persists not by abundance of resources, but by precision in using them. In desert mountains, water does not function as a refuge. It functions as a signal. Where it appears, movement follows. Where movement gathers, attention sharpens. Natural water sources are few and exposed small springs, shallow pools, narrow channels formed after rare rainfall. They sit below the cliffs, away from vertical escape routes. To reach them, animals must descend from safety into open terrain, where sightlines stretch far and cover disappears. For large herbivores, this transition is dangerous. The Nubian ibex does not approach these sites casually. Access to water is infrequent and deliberate. Entire herds alter their routines around it, delaying descent for as long as possible. The longer they remain above, the safer they are. But remaining above also increases physiological strain. Predators understand this geography. They do not need to pursue the cliffs. They wait near the only places that matter. Water concentrates life, and concentration simplifies hunting. Time spent drinking is time spent exposed. As a result, the act of hydration becomes a calculated risk. Approaching too early increases detection. Approaching too late weakens the body. The window between these two pressures is narrow, and it shifts constantly with temperature, season, and recent rainfall. The ibex responds not with confrontation, but avoidance. Drinking events are rare. When they occur, they are brief. Entry and exit routes are chosen carefully, often favoring steep approaches that reduce pursuit options, even if they demand greater physical effort. This conflict does not unfold through visible struggle. It unfolds through restraint. Every decision to delay water reduces one danger while increasing another. Survival depends on maintaining balance between dehydration and exposure, with no margin for miscalculation. In this environment, water is not simply scarce, it is hazardous, and the ability to survive without frequent access to it becomes the defining pressure-shaping behavior. Avoiding water does not eliminate the need for it. Instead, survival shifts to a quieter strategy. Across the cliff faces, vegetation holds what liquid the desert allows. Leaves collect trace humidity during the early hours. Stems retain moisture drawn slowly from rock and dust. This water is not visible. It does not pool or flow. It exists in fragments, dispersed across the landscape. The Nubian ibex feeds with this limitation in mind. Foraging routes climb upward rather than outward, reaching plants inaccessible to most other species. These elevations offer two advantages: reduced predation risk and access to vegetation that experiences slightly cooler temperatures and marginally higher moisture retention. Movement becomes purposeful and restrained. The herd does not waste energy searching widely. It follows narrow bands of growth along the rock, pausing briefly, then advancing. Feeding is not about abundance, but accumulation, small amounts gathered consistently over time. This strategy works only under specific conditions. Extended heat dries plant tissue faster. Prolonged drought reduces moisture content even at higher elevations. As temperatures rise, the margin narrows. When days pass without relief, the limits of this method become apparent. Feeding alone can no longer compensate for loss. Bodies conserve water by reducing unnecessary movement. Activity shifts toward cooler hours. Rest replaces exploration. The tension builds without confrontation. No chase occurs. No visible threat advances. Instead, pressure comes from within the environment itself. The same cliffs that provide refuge also restrict options. The longer open water is avoided, the fewer alternatives remain. Survival here is not decided by speed or strength. It is decided by endurance under constraint, by how long a large body can function while extracting moisture measured in fractions. In the desert mountains, hydration is not an event. It is a process stretched across time, terrain, and restraint. Life on the cliffs follows a strict rhythm. Movement is not constant, and neither is feeding. The Nubian ibex organizes its day around temperature, light, and terrain, adjusting activity to minimize loss while maintaining access to limited resources. Herd structure plays a critical role. Individuals move together along established paths, using the same ledges and slopes repeatedly. These routes are not chosen at random. They represent accumulated knowledge shaped by generations, paths that balance safety, energy cost, and access to vegetation. Deviating from them increases risk without reward. Feeding occurs in short intervals. Plants are stripped selectively, never entirely exhausted in a single pass. This restraint preserves future access and reduces the need for wide-ranging movement. When conditions worsen, these patterns tighten further. The herd compresses its range, trading variety for security. rest is equally controlled. During the hottest hours, activity slows almost to stillness. Bodies position themselves against rock faces that provide minimal shade and thermal buffering. Exposure is reduced, and water loss through respiration and movement is minimized. Young animals are integrated into this rhythm early. They follow the same routes, pause at the same ledges, and rest when the herd rests. Survival here does not allow improvisation. It requires conformity to a system refined by environmental pressure. What appears calm is the result of constant adjustment. Every hour reflects a balance between energy intake and water conservation. The herd does not search for opportunity. It maintains stability. In this environment, daily life is not about growth or expansion. It is about persistence, maintaining position within narrow limits set by heat, stone, and scarcity. Eventually, the desert tightens its grip. Extended drought strips the cliffs of what little flexibility they provide. Vegetation becomes brittle. Moisture content drops even in plants adapted to arid conditions. The early morning humidity that once sustained the herd fades, leaving feeding routes less effective with each passing day. As internal reserves decline, the balance shifts. Avoidance alone is no longer sufficient. The herd's movement patterns begin to stretch downward, closer to elevations they typically abandon. This change is subtle, but significant. Each meter descended increases exposure. Each pause on open ground lengthens vulnerability. Water sources that were once optional become unavoidable. Yet these locations remain unchanged, open, predictable, and watched. The landscape offers no alternative routes, only a narrowing set of choices shaped by necessity rather than preference. The ibex responds with extreme caution. Approaches are timed to cooler hours. Entry paths favor steep, broken terrain that limits pursuit. Time spent near water is reduced to the minimum required for function. No individual lingers. No movement is wasted. Even so, risk increases. Drought compresses activity across species. Predators concentrate their efforts where access is forced. The desert simplifies the equation. Fewer options, higher stakes. This conflict does not resolve through dominance or escape. It resolves through endurance. The species survives not by eliminating danger, but by passing through it with precision, accepting exposure only when the cost of avoidance becomes greater. In the desert mountains, adaptation is tested most severely when all margins disappear. What remains is not strength, but discipline shaped by generations under the same pressure. As conditions ease or tighten again, the mountains return to their silence. The cliffs remain unchanged, steep, exposed, and indifferent. Water still appears only briefly. Vegetation continues to grow in fragments. The environment offers no resolution, only continuity. The Nubian ibex does not dominate this landscape. It does not reshape it or exhaust its limits. Instead, it persists within boundaries that never expand. Its survival is defined by restraint rather than access, by precision rather than abundance. Across seasons and generations, the species maintains its place by minimizing dependence on the most dangerous resource of all. Drinking becomes rare, movement becomes deliberate. Life continues not because conditions improve, but because behavior remains aligned with scarcity. In these desert mountains, survival is not measured by how much is taken from the land. It is measured by how little is required to endure. The ibex exists at the edge of what is possible for a large mammal, not by defying the desert, but by adapting to its strictest rules. Stone, heat, and absence shape every moment, and within those limits, life continues quietly, efficiently, and without excess. Here, endurance is not an act of resistance. It is the result of living precisely within what the land allows.